So great. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have all of you with us. You're my colleague, Rachel. Do you want to introduce yourself, Rachel?
Sure. I'm Rachel Bassi. I'm an assessment developer with Michigan Language Assessment, and I'm the project lead for ECCE writing. Nice to see you all here. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. It's great to have you with us today, Rachel. And I'm Fernando Florking. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications and Stakeholder Relations. We have prepared a great webinar for all of you, and it's a pleasure to collaborate with you, Rachel, on this special webinar. We based it on many of the questions that all of you sent when you registered. So we appreciate the input and the questions that you had about what you needed to hear from us in terms of how to better prepare students. This is an overview of the agenda. We'll go over the writing section, the rating scale. Rachel will analyze some samples from the last administration from May, and we'll talk a little bit about a few tips to help prepare for ECCE. So, Rachel, all to you now.
Great.
About the writing section.
Okay. So let's start by just taking a look at what test takers have to do in the writing section for ECCE. So as you know, we have revised ECCE as of May 2021. So we have task 1, which is an email task, and task 2, which is an essay task. And these tasks are slightly different. So for the email task, there is some kind of situation or proposal that test takers need to respond to, and they have to write an email to a person of authority. So in this case, it's the school principal, giving their opinion and giving reasons to support their ideas. And we always tell the test takers who that person is. So in this case, it's Principal Burns. For the essay, we usually have a statement, and then the test takers write an essay on whether or not they agree or disagree with the statement above and include specific reasons and examples to support their opinion. So it's only one of the tasks that a test taker would need to respond to, the email or the essay, and they have 30 minutes to complete it. So yeah, it's really important to just study the prompt and think about what is the reason for writing, the number one thing, and then who is the audience for writing. So in the case of the email, we always give the audience, the principal of the school or the manager of a coffee shop or the director of a university. And for the essay, it's just the general audience that you would expect to write to for an academic essay. If it's hard for your students to think about the audience, you could just say, think about writing to your teacher for the formal essay. So I'll just go ahead and read out the two tasks. So for task 1, the email, the principal of a local high school is proposing that all students take one practical life skills class, such as cooking or auto repair, in order to graduate. She would like to know what students think of this idea. Write an email to the school principal to explain your opinion. Give reasons to support your ideas. Start your email, Dear Principal Burns. And you'll see that with this email, the test taker kind of has to think about themselves as in the role of the student. So they're writing to the principal on behalf of a student, talking about this idea and giving their opinion. For the essay, young adults should live for at least 1 year in a new city away from home. Write an essay on whether you agree or disagree with the statement above. Include specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. So now we'll take a look at some of the questions that you had about the ECCE writing prompt. What are the different possible kinds of topics students might be asked to write in the exam? There are all kinds of topics, so it's difficult to give an answer for that. We always try to avoid using the same topics. So when we create these prompts, we look at all the old prompts that we have that have already been used and try to avoid using the same type of prompt. For the email task, could be anything. It could be, a policy that's going to be changed and the student has to give their opinion. It could be giving recommendations on a place to go. Could be anything. So we kind of try to leave it open and use different topics from all possible areas. So it could be educational, could be work-related topics, could be personal topics, lots of different things. And for the essay, it's usually a statement, and it could be just any kind of general statement that the test taker has to respond to. What are the main types of letters that a student should be prepared for? So we don't really have types of letters, but it could be just any kind of situation. So if you think about just in general, what would be a reason that you would have to write a letter or an email to somebody? So, are you giving a recommendation? Are you arguing that you don't agree with something? Just thinking about in general the situations where somebody would write an email to a person of authority would be a good place to start. And then in task 2, the opinion essay, should students present both sides of the issue and state their opinion in the conclusion or not? Definitely, we would encourage presenting both sides of the issue. That's just a way to have a well-balanced essay. If you're only arguing for the pro side and you don't give a counter argument, it's kind of easy to, for the audience to say, well, why is it only the pro in your opinion? In terms of stating the opinion in the conclusion, the opinion can be stated anywhere. So it could be in the introduction, in the conclusion, throughout the essay, in the introduction and the conclusion. It's just up to your students to decide where they want to state their opinions. And then how long
sorry to add something, but it would be important to be consistent throughout. It's not that they're going to say something at the beginning and something different at the end. So making sure that they are focused on the main idea and they are consistent in expressing that idea through the details, the way they organize it in some way.
Absolutely. Some students actually start out by talking about just in general, there could be many different kinds of opinions, and then they argue the pros and the cons. And then in the conclusion, they kind of come down on one side. So that's another option, but there's no one way to do it.
Right.
And then in terms of length, how long the writing should be, we do not have any kind of word limit or, recommended number of pages. The important thing is just development. So are your students giving, multiple reasons? Are they giving examples, personal examples, just support for their ideas? That's the most important thing that we look for in terms of length. We sometimes come to situations where we have a really, really long, lengthy response, but we can't really find much development within it. Maybe it's just repetition of the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that development and giving ideas and supporting those ideas, that's the thing to focus on for ECCE.
And we'll clarify that with some of the examples as well.
Yes, absolutely.
What about the rating scale?
So the rating scale is based on 4 different criteria. So we have content and development that talks about just the relevance of the content to the task, the quality of ideas that are used to develop the response. So we talked about that before with the development. The length, so thinking about it not necessarily in terms of word count, but just the development, the relevance of what the test taker is trying to say to the prompt, giving supporting details to back up claims, and then we do factor in reliance on prompt content in this case. So if a test taker relies too heavily on the prompt, then they're not really developing their own unique ideas. So that could be a factor that limits development. The next category is organization and connection of ideas. So that would be the arrangement of the content. So the different paragraphs, how it's structured, how language is used to link ideas using transition markers. So that's characterized by the smooth flow of ideas linked by transition markers, the cohesion and coherence of the response. So can the reader follow it well? The connection of ideas across paragraphs. And then paragraphing conventions, we'll talk about that a little bit as we look at the samples. They are important, but it is possible to not use paragraphing conventions and still have a well-organized and well-connected response. And then the third category is linguistic range of control. So that refers to the vocabulary, the variety and precision of the grammar and the vocabulary. So we look at accuracy We look at severity of errors. So the question that we ask ourselves a lot of times is, okay, so there are some errors here, but am I able to understand what the test taker was saying? The use of prompt-specific vocabulary. So are they using that vocabulary specifically geared toward this prompt? And repetition of vocabulary could be a factor too. The final category is communicative effect. So that refers to how well communicative goals are achieved. So we think about whether or not the test taker is addressing the prompt and the purpose for the writing. Are they establishing context in their writing? So if somebody didn't read the prompt and they just read the response, would they understand the context for why this test taker was writing? The genre requirements, so are they writing in the email genre? Are they writing in the essay genre or the letter genre? And appropriate register. So they know who they're writing to and they're using that formal register in order to get their ideas across. And for each category, we have a possible total of 5 different points. So you can see 1 or 2 on the scale would be below standard. A 3 would be the standard score. And then a 4 or a 5 would be exceeds the standard. All right, so questions from the audience. The ECCE rating scale. How is an ECCE graded and what are the required length and words? So I already discussed the length and the words before. So how is it graded? Take a look at the essay and we give an analytic score. So that is 1 score for each of those 4 categories. So it's rated just based on those categories. The raters will look at the scale. They will try to find, just like you do in class with rubrics that you create, I'm sure, they try to find where does this essay fall on this rubric for each of the 4 criteria. And when we look at the criteria, we try to separate those from each other. So if we're looking at content development and communicative effect, we kind of try to look at those separately. How much does handwriting affect assessment? Handwriting doesn't affect assessment, but we do need to be able to read the response. I don't think that we've ever come to a situation where we have not been able to read a response, but if we did, then it would be difficult for us to give a score. Spelling errors and their significance as for the overall assessment. Spelling errors are not counted at all on the ECCE writing scale. How important is it to avoid the use of short forms, abbreviations, and informal language in formal writing? I think that in formal writing, you would try to avoid using abbreviations and informal language. So you can ask your students just to think about if they were writing to the principal of the school, would they be writing to them the same way that they're writing to a friend in a text message with abbreviations and some informal language? The answer is probably not. So I think for the ECCE writing, they should try to follow that same line of thinking. And finally, are the overuse of linkers and the use of memorized chunks, phrases, and sentences marked down? I think that in terms of linkers, we do try to think about whether or not the linkers are being used in a mechanical way. So is it just that the test taker is starting every single sentence with a linker, or are the linkers purposeful? And also, we do come into situations where we see linkers that are not being used correctly. So a test taker may say, moreover, and then in the next part of the sentence, they give a contradictory response to what was just previously said. So thinking about just using linkers accurately and trying not to use them too much would be important. And just a variety of different linkers. It doesn't necessarily have to be transition markers. Test takers could use reference to refer to things that have been previously stated. They could use content linkers. So not necessarily however, moreover, therefore, but actually using part of the response's content. So, thinking about the election in a different way, and they would go on to state their next category. Memorize chunks, phrases, and sentences. I wouldn't say that those are marked down, but that can take away from the development if we just see a memorized phrase or, in the introduction or the conclusion, we're just seeing a memorized phrase that's not really giving development for the test takers' ideas. So in those cases, if you have, 3 paragraphs and 2 of them are just memorized phrases that could be applying to anything, and you only have 1 paragraph where actually the ideas are being developed, then that could count toward the development and it being insufficient for that specific essay or email.
Perfect. Yeah, those were we got several questions related to that. So let's look at some samples and illustrate all of this. Here, there's one first sample this route. For task 2, the essay, young adults, the prompt that, no, was not the one that you read before. Young adults should live for at least 1 year in a new city away from home. Do you want me to read this, or?
That would be great.
So everybody can follow along. You're probably going to read it faster than I can, but to give you an overview of what the test taker, or let's pretend that I did this one. I agree with the statement that young adults should move away in a new city for 1 year. I really support the idea of that for many reasons. One of them being that everyone at least once in their life will need to move away from their parents' house and start a new life with their own kids. So moving away from their home city for 1 year will teach them how it is to start, conserve, and end something just by yourself. Furthermore, if they will live just by themselves, they're going to learn to keep their economical situation stable with no fluctuations. This will be proven very useful in their future adulthood period. To sum up, I think that this is a very good idea to send them away for 1 year, since they're going to learn what it means to be an adult. Hence, they will have a much brighter future. And who knows, maybe the lessons they were taught are going to pass down generations and generations, which means they will have improving their kids' and grandkids' success rates. So how did I do, Rachel?
So let's take a look at how this essay was rated. So we can see that there was adequate development here. The test taker does support their argument and gives a few details in each paragraph. There's a clear organization and connection of ideas. So we have the introduction, we have 2 body paragraphs and a conclusion, and there's a good use of connectors throughout. You'll see here that there isn't really an overuse of connectors. It's kind of just right. And then in terms of the grammar, there's a good range here. So we have some complex sentences, only occasional errors. We have some effective use of vocabulary. We have some pretty high-level vocabulary, fluctuations that's used here. And communicative effect, the test taker definitely understood the reason for writing, and they had an adequate sense of the audience. So they maintained that formal register throughout, and they proved that they could write a pretty academic, formal essay here. So yeah, let's see how this test taker did. They passed, okay? So, they passed. It wouldn't be necessarily a high pass for this particular test taker, but they did pass. They showed that they had everything that they needed for a passing score.
Great, let's look at another one.
Okay.
So this is on a different prompt and a different task. This is an email. The task was writing an email. The principal of a local high school wants to start a new school policy. Students' grades will not be shared with their parents unless the students agree to share them. He wants to know what members of the community think about this idea. Write an email to the school principal to explain your opinion, give your reasons to support your ideas, and start your email, Dear Mr. Costa. So, Dear Mr. Costa, I'm writing to you about the recent change in our school's policy. While keeping the grades between the school and the students has some advantages, such as building trust between students and teachers, it could also allow some students to view school as optional, since it would no longer have any immediate consequences after the end of class. Such a policy, while beneficiary to some students, could potentially lead other students to conclude that their actions have no real consequence. That being said, I can also see the value such a policy can have. One of the biggest problems in the education system is the mandatory nature of it and the constant punishment of any and all students who do not comply with the rules. This often leads students to view school not as a place of learning where curiosity is rewarded, but as a hostile environment that punishes them. Overall, the new policy has both positives and negatives and should not be implemented until we're sure of the effect it would have on the behavior of the students. With respect, a member of your community.
Okay, thanks, Fernando. So you can see here that there's a big difference between the last essay that we read and this email here. There's a lot more development. So it fully develops the email with positive and negative aspects. It uses appropriate and supporting details, and there's a really strong conclusion here. There are no paragraphs in this response, but that's okay because the organization is very apparent. The test taker does use really nice, seamless transitions between ideas, and those are not necessarily transition markers. So if you see here, for example, such a policy, that being said, one of the biggest problems in the education system, so they're using a lot of content-based transition markers, which is really effective in this case. There's also a broad range of grammar and vocabulary. There's some really, really nice complex sentences within this response, and the vocabulary is very high level. And the communicative effect is also on point with appropriate register and an awareness of the audience. So they're writing to the school principal, they're very aware of this, and everything just matches with that formal register within the response. So overall, this test taker's results would be a high pass. So it's not a perfect example, but it would be considered a high pass. Let's go on to the next one. Oh, Fernando, I think you're muted.
There you go. This is an essay. The prompt says the government should provide technology and social media classes to people aged 65 and older so they can stay connected with their family and friends and family. So nowadays, people aged 65 and older didn't own technology in general, the social media, but the government came to help these people to stay connected with their family and friends. In this statement, I stay and I tell also my personal opinion. I agree with this statement for many reasons. First, many people in this age stay alone, so the government can help these people write to their families with technology, and more specifically with many apps like Viper and Instagram. Also, people in this age can learn many tools to see their friends or family on their phones. As a result, will be excited and they didn't feel alone. Finally, it's a great idea for these people to come in these classes to learn about technology and social media, and then will enjoy their time happy with friends' faces in front of their people.
Okay, so for the content development of this response, you can see that there are a few ideas, but it's not very developed. So if you go to the next one, I think it highlights the two main points. So they're talking about the reason that a lot of people stay alone and they can download these apps and they can have a connection with their family and their friends. So those points are basically repeated throughout the response, which is pretty short to begin with. So there isn't a lot of development and there isn't a lot of fresh ideas that are being supported throughout. And when those ideas are stated, it's usually just one sentence that is given and no examples, no logical development following that. The organization and connection of ideas, we do have a good structure here. So there's an introduction. There is one body paragraph with the two main ideas, and then the conclusion. And there are some good transition markers here. So yeah, those are all there. For linguistic range and control, there are some unsuccessful attempts to use a range of grammatical structures. So we see that there are some errors here, and they affect the reader comprehension at some points. Fernando was kind of struggling throughout the second part of the response to read through. And actually, a really good idea and a good way to help your students to, just go through and see if there are any of these kinds of errors that could affect comprehension. It's just to have them go ahead and read through the response, because I think that reading through a response instead of just out loud, instead of just reading it with your eyes, can be really helpful, because you kind of stumble on certain words or it's hard to say certain phrases, and that's when you can find where those errors lie. In terms of communicative effect, it does provide some context. It does achieve some of the communicative goals. So it's talking about, the agreement or disagreement with the statement about 65-year-old individuals and their technology. But it's a little bit lacking in some of the other areas. So in this situation, the response received a fail.
Mm-hmm. And it's explained by the different, throughout the different categories from the rubric. You explained that.
Right.
We have one final sample.
And I'm going to go ahead and read this one. Okay, so this is task 1 email. The principal of a local high school is proposing that all students take one practical life skills class, such as cooking or auto repair, in order to graduate. She would like to know what students think of this idea. Write an email to the school principal to explain your opinion. Give reasons to support your ideas. Start your email, Dear Principal Burns. Dear Mr. Principal, how are you? I'm sending you this email to tell you my opinion. I think you should do the cooking class, because they will learn how to cook properly, and for a future they can open a restaurant and they can work as the restaurants. They have gold credits, they have a Michelin star, and restaurant be famous, but in cooking they can learn passions, how hard work it is to cook, and learn from the best. And they can go to a cooking show, or they can have their cooking show, so we can focus on cooking and can do some practice for the life that it is coming for them, of how they can feed their children with healthier food for them, or they can go to a university and learn to others how can they cook and have a great future for them and their families, and they can be wealthier and can be rich. But it is my opinion, I think you should do that for a better future and be successful on their life, or the can be professional cooker, who knows, like Gordon Ramsay or Elias McCartans or Akis Veterchidis or Demetrius Skarmachosis. Please forgive my pronunciation of these names. But this is my opinion. All in all, if help you with my opinion, this is your student. Bye. Okay, so here you have an example of a lengthier response that is still inadequately developed. So there are very few relevant details to the prompt. Let's go back up and look at the prompt again. The principal of a local high school is proposing that all students take one practical life skills class, such as cooking or auto repair, in order to graduate. She would like to know what students think of this idea. So in this case, the test taker has really latched on to that idea of the cooking and kind of taken it to another level in terms of explaining how somebody could take a cooking class and what their future could look like if they're a successful cook. But it's not really responding necessarily to this idea of what's given in the prompt. There is some irrelevant content, so they're just talking about ways that cooking can help them feed their families. They could be famous. They could be on a TV show one day. The organization and connection of ideas. There is not a lot of organization here beyond a greeting and a conclusion. So there's no paragraphing, which we said it's okay if you've got the connectors to link the ideas together. But in this case, we're not really seeing that. There's also no punctuation in this response, which is not something that we explicitly take into consideration. It's not part of the scale, but it does have a negative effect on the reader in terms of organization. You can't really follow what this test taker is trying to say. So linguistic range of control, one long run-on sentence. There are very frequent grammar errors that affect the reader's comprehension at times. And in terms of communicative effect, there's a misunderstanding of the audience. So they do write to the principal at the beginning. There's the salutation, but we can't really see how they're addressing the principal throughout the response. And the purpose is also missing. So we're not really sure what this test taker thinks in the end about these practical life skills class. We know how they feel about cooking, but we don't really know how they feel about what's in the prompt. So the communicative goals are not really being achieved here. And for all of those reasons, we can see that this response would be a low fail.
Okay, so let's see a few more questions from the audience that they sent. You already told a little about some of these, like some examples of essays. These are examples that would be adequate, showing passing levels or failing, or others that didn't meet the criteria to pass.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so we have examples of essays that would be adequate to pass the exams. So you just saw a few examples where there was a pass and then also a high pass. So just taking a look at the scale and looking at what would the standard be, you can get an idea of what a passing response would look like. In what paragraph do we give our opinion in an opinion essay? So we covered that a little bit before. It could be in the introduction, the conclusion, throughout, but the important thing is that it's consistent. And then what happens when a student doesn't have time to write a conclusion? This is a really good question. So a student has 30 minutes to take the ECCE writing test, and we know that that can sometimes lead to running out of time. So if there's no conclusion, there's no penalty for that. It's always nice to have a conclusion, even if it's just one sentence, to kind of bring the ideas back and restate the thesis statement and kind of round everything out in the response. But if the test taker didn't have time to do that, then it's not penalized whatsoever. However, if we do see an effective conclusion, like we did with the high pass response, we would take that into consideration and give the test taker credit for their work on that conclusion.
So the development is really important, and the conclusion would add to kind of wrapping up the whole idea that they were trying to elaborate, but it wouldn't be absolutely critical to get to that point as long as everything else is well explained and organized before then.
Exactly.
Great. Any other comments about the samples or anything else, Rachel, so far?
Not for me. I'm excited to hear some teaching tips.
Okay, so yeah, some other suggestions from what you were saying in terms of what we can do to help students, test takers, to get ready for the exam, and some other resources. One of the questions that we frequently get is students tend to get low marks. They're working hard to perform well during the preparation here, and what do we do to help them in some way? It seems that they are doing much better during the course and writing in the course, but then they might not do well on the exam. Learning a little about everything that Rachel was explaining in terms of the understanding the prompt and the rubrics will be important, but helping them work on writing as a process in general, and not just preparing for the exam, but becoming better writers overall, and developing their language skills, all their communicative skills, and writing is one of them, will be important to do well on the writing section and on the exam as well. But this framework, we've presented this at a previous webinar for teaching writing through different stages, more as a process. Best practices in terms of teaching writing and research show that writing is a process, and the best way to work with it in class as well, learning how to become better writers, is by engaging in a series of different stages, starting with understanding different types of writing, analyzing essays or letters or emails or the kind of writing that they're going to be preparing for in this case, getting ready to start writing during that pre-writing stage and elaborating, thinking about how they're going to organize it, what content they're going to use, how they're going to put ideas together, just planning those ideas before they actually start writing. Then doing the writing part itself and spending some time editing, revising, working on how to improve that. And that can be done, obviously, individually. Writing is something that you have to do on your own, but there's a lot we can do in an interactive class in working with students. At each of those different stages, we can do it as a whole class, in small groups, pairs, in different ways, but it can be a very interactive type of activity. And you have some suggestions here for those different stages. In terms of the pre-writing stage, you can brainstorm some vocabulary or ideas, or start listing, what can I say about that? This is the main topic, and what can I say? What are the pros and cons, or advantages or disadvantages? Or do I like this policy, or I would be against this policy? And what arguments can I mention on both sides in some way? There are many ways to collaborate, to write collaboratively with others, and benefiting from the interaction with other peers, with friends, with other students in the class, to work together and improve their own writing skills. And then spending some time revising, editing, to improve the language, revising sentences or the grammar, vocabulary. Is there a more sophisticated word that I can use instead of a simple adjective that I was using in that particular case? Obviously, this is while they're working on their language skills, on their writing in class. They will have limited time during the day of the test to complete this. But there are many things that by engaging in all these different activities in class, they will be much better prepared to do better on the day of the test. We have a resource pack for ECCE writing on our website. If you look at the ECCE test preparation materials we have on the website at michiganassessment.org, you will find this that has a series of activities, lesson plans, and several activities reflecting that kind of interactive and process-oriented writing framework that we were just talking about. You can download it from our website. One of those activities that is mentioned there is like giving them some general guidelines to analyze an essay. It could be just providing a list like this. Look at the main argument. Find some supporting argument or ideas. What are some transition phrases? What is some kind of descriptive language that is being used? And you can adapt the wording of these prompts, these suggestions for students to identify when they're looking at an essay. Or you can give them more detailed instructions. Find 4 adjectives or adverbs, or did the writer use any specific examples? Find and correct 5 spelling mistakes. You can be very specific in terms of how you want to guide them as you revise or look at this to analyze a writing sample, so that they can, by analyzing something that they wrote or something that others wrote, they can also become better writers and improve their own proficiency in that case. And so fortunately, we still have a little time, get some practice with all of you. And this we'll look at another sample from an essay, and you have the prompt here. We already saw some responses for this particular prompt. young adults should live for at least 1 year in a new city away from home. You have to write an essay on whether you agree or disagree with the statement above, including specific reasons and examples to support your opinion. You're not writing the essay. What you're going to do is we'll show you one sample and you will analyze this essay. Choose one of those 6 areas, either the main argument, what are some supporting details, some connectors, transition phrases that are used, what are some more complex grammatical structures that the writer is using in this case. What would you say about the vocabulary range that is being used, and how does the writer achieve this community goal that Rachel was talking about for that particular essay? So I'll show you the sample in a minute. So choose one of those 6 categories and write your notes in the chat. We'll give you 3 minutes to read the sample, and I'm not going to read it out loud this time. You will read it by yourself. Otherwise, I will be very biased in the way I was reading it. So there you go. Let's go 3 minutes for you to read it and write some notes on the chat. Just choose one of those 6 areas. So when you're ready, you can write on the chat some of your conclusions, the category that you chose, and some notes. I don't know if there are any comments. I don't see anything so far, but I'm sharing my screen, so I don't know if there are comments shared there. But
comments in the chat.
You probably found several things related to the main opinion of the writer on this essay. Young adults should live for at least 1 year in a new city away from home. Does the writer agree with this or not? What are the supporting details? Probably found a few things there. Some connectors.
Renata says that the chat is disabled. Maybe we could enable a chat and give people the opportunity to.
Let me check. Why is that?
I am seeing comments in the Q&A though.
Okay, no, sorry about that then. We'll keep sharing this. Not a problem. I'm sure you already found several elements related to this.
Maybe we could use the Q&A if anyone wants to just write what they saw in the Q&A.
But we're the only ones who would see those, yes. But if you want to share some of those comments through the Q&A, that's fine. But I'm sure that you already found areas for each of those for 6 categories here. The next one that we're going to do related to this is we would like you to decide whether this is a high pass, pass, fail, or low fail. So kind of we included the main categories from the rubric, and there is a poll to do this. So you already read it. There's a poll that is for you to vote in terms of what is this? High pass, pass, fail, or low fail essay. Let's see what everybody thinks. How well you did your homework. Great. We'll wait a couple more minutes. We have 30% of participants responded so far. Let's see, this is getting very interesting. This is not exactly the same process that Rachel mentioned how we're rating it, because we would be evaluating each of these different categories separately, but overall to give you an idea of how to assess have a general idea about how you're rating an essay like this one. Now let's share the results. So the great majority felt that this was a pass, 58%. 3% felt that this is a high pass, and there were 39% who failed or should get a low fail. What do you think of the results, Rachel?
I think it's interesting that it was so split between pass and fail. Do we want to tell them what the result is?
Yeah. So if we look at, let's look at this. Content and development, there are there's a general idea expressed from the beginning about the topic, and then the writer's opinion about that expressed from the beginning, with a few supporting details, opportunities for jobs, better life, opportunities to study if you're going to move to another place for different reasons in this case. So there's some elaboration in terms of content that is relevant to that particular task. In terms of the organization and the ideas, there are several things there. You can see different paragraphs. There are some linking expressions like another thing, and to give an example, and some connectors that help connect the ideas more smoothly. This is another pronoun reference to refer to the previous idea as well. There is some range in appropriate control of both grammar and vocabulary. There are some more complex, more sophisticated expressions, grammatical structures, and some vocabulary that is accurately used, others that statements or more attempts to use more sophisticated language, but not as accurately in some cases. So overall, this was rated as a pass. It was meeting all the overall criteria to, finally the communicative effect, that was the other one, the other category. There are different ideas that are expressed through the different paragraphs. The writer understood the purpose of the task, establishes some context, and explains his position in the appropriate type of response for this particular task. So community goals are achieved to that extent. So this was an overall pass. And anything else that you want to add, Rachel?
I think that you covered everything, but I would say, yeah, you have all the elements here that are necessary, and I think it helped to highlight those different things. So yeah.
Right. So some final ideas about helping students be better prepared for the writing section, but it's more than just preparing for a specific exams. In a way, we're helping them to become better writers, and the exam will be a reflection of what they have learned in class, how much they have progressed in their language education journey, in this case, in English in particular, and how far they've gone in that journey in terms of all the skills that they're showing. So it's really helping them to become better writers and better communicators, and helping them have more ideas to express and to express them more efficiently, and helping them as we're doing that, we're helping them to perform better on the exam, of course. If we look at all the elements that Rachel explained in terms of the understanding the prompt and understanding the rubrics, there's a lot we can infer in terms of what they have to keep in mind when they're writing this section, for the particular section of ECCE. We have to help them discover how they can identify the kind of audience that they're writing for, keeping that in mind when they're writing it, and how they can adapt what they're writing to make sure that it's appropriate for that particular audience. The type of language, the register that they're using, the salutation, is this a formal essay or is it just, hey, how are you, Mr. Principal? Is there a good match between the ideas that they're expressing and how they're trying to convey that for that particular audience? Understanding the community goals of the task, as Rachel was explaining, is really important as well, making sure that they are accomplishing what is expected from that particular task in terms of those communication goals that are kind of described through the prompt itself. Helping them find some time to plan what they will write, how they will organize it, how they will plan the main ideas and how they're going to support each of those. Making sure that it's relevant, that it's appropriate, that it's on the task, that it's answering the prompt itself. It's not just going in another direction. As the example about cooking classes, the test taker didn't really respond to that particular prompt. They talked about cooking classes and something else that was not exactly what was explained, what was requested from the prompt itself. Organizing ideas appropriately and helping them find better ways to organize the message in a way that makes sense, that is logical, that is coherent, that is consistently supported throughout the entire piece of writing. And obviously a challenge that they will have is to manage their time efficiently. So some practice that they can do in class might be untimed, just spend as long as it needs to write and to keep writing and developing fluency and becoming confident in their writing skills, but also they will need some practice with timed assignments so that they can monitor how much they can do in terms of planning everything, writing it, revising it if they have some time to check, to give a final kind of quick look at the whole essay or what they wrote. In general, if there's anything that they can correct, modify, improve in any way. All that in a limited amount of time. So it is an important achievement, and we know how proud they are when they finally get their ECCE certificate and score reports. So we hope that we provided some new information and that you can share some ideas with the rest of your colleagues, and you can use some of these ideas with your own students as well. Any final words, Rachel? Anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
We hope that this has been helpful, as Fernando said, and I think that it's really important to be good writers. You have to be good readers too. So encouraging your students to read essays and to analyze those according to the criteria that we have in our scale. That can also help just having them look out for the things that we would be looking for as raters could be really beneficial for them to improve their own writing. Thank you for being with us today. It was great talking about ECCE.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, for everything you did for this webinar, and everybody for sending all the questions that you sent us in advance, registering for the webinar and participating. Great pleasure to be in touch with you. Let us know any comments, any other suggestions that you have. You have our email on our website and at info@ or at marketing@michiganassessment.org. We'd be glad to help you, and good luck with your next round of exams and helping your students become very successful ECCE test takers this time. Thank you so much and have a great day.